What if a single song had the power to change the course of music history? But the world was never allowed to hear it? Imagine a track recorded in the dead of night, behind locked studio doors, by two of the most legendary voices of a generation. Imagine a melody so haunting, so powerful, that insiders swore it could have shifted the balance of the entire industry. A duet not just of music, but of rivalry, redemption, and rebellion. Yet this song has remained hidden, locked away, silenced. Why? Because this wasn't just a recording. It was a dangerous statement. A piece of art so combustible that powerful people wanted it erased from existence. And they nearly succeeded. For decades, whispers of this track have passed through recording booths and backstage corridors. Fans caught hints in interviews, journalists chased dead-end leads, and engineers swore they'd heard fragments of its melody. But no one outside the walls of that studio, has ever laid ears on the full creation. It was more than music. It was the sound of two titans colliding. It was the chance to unite worlds that had always been kept apart. Some believed it could have redefined careers. Others believed it could have toppled empires, and yet it never saw the light of day. Tonight we open the vault on this forgotten story, the secret collaboration between two legends whose voices together could have shaken the earth. The duet that was recorded and then buried. What happened on that night? Why was the tape silenced? And who, behind the glittering world of fame and fortune, had the power and the motive to stop the world from hearing it? The answers lie in betrayal, in rivalry, and in the raw, unfiltered truth about what happens when art threatens power. Because this is the story of the unreleased duet that could have changed music forever. And the deeper we go, the clearer one truth becomes. The world was never meant to hear this song. Cliffhanger. But before we understand why it was silenced, we must first understand the legends who dared to create it. Two names, two voices, two legacies so towering that even the thought of them standing side by side seemed impossible. On one side, an artist who had conquered the charts with relentless energy, their voice soaring like fire, commanding stadiums, rewriting the rules of what a performer could be, a figure adored by millions but also stalked by controversy. They were untouchable, magnetic, impossible to ignore. On the other side, an equally iconic figure, known for their precision, their elegance, their ability to turn a simple note into an immortal phrase. A voice that critics called timeless. A performer whose artistry wasn't just about spectacle, it was about soul. Their fan bases were divided. Their industries kept them in separate worlds. They weren't rivals in the traditional sense, but their careers were carved in such different directions that the idea of them joining forces seemed almost mythic. And yet, in the late hours of a particular evening, their paths crossed. Not on a stage, not at an award show, but in the quiet sanctuary of a recording studio. It wasn't publicity. It wasn't orchestrated by managers chasing headlines. It was something more intimate. A meeting born out of curiosity, and perhaps a hunger neither of them had admitted before. Those who were present that night would later whisper about the tension that filled the room before the microphones were even turned on. Two stars, each used to being the brightest light in the room, suddenly forced to share space, share notes, share breath. It could have gone disastrously. Egos could have clashed, tempers could have boiled, the session could have ended in silence. But instead, something extraordinary happened. As the first notes rang out, the air shifted. They weren't fighting each other. They weren't competing. They were fusing. Their voices intertwined like fire and smoke, each one amplifying the other's strength, masking the other's weaknesses, pushing both into uncharted territory. For a few hours, the impossible became reality, and those inside the studio swore they had witnessed history in the making. But history is fragile, and this moment of brilliance was never meant to survive. Cliffhanger. Because what happened that night in the studio would spark a chain of events no one could control. It began just past midnight. The city outside was silent, but inside that studio, electricity buzzed in the air. Not from the machines, not from the cables, but from the unspoken knowledge that something extraordinary was about to happen. The producer set the tape rolling. The room hushed, and the first chords were struck. What followed was not smooth. It wasn't effortless. The two legends didn't immediately fall into harmony like some fairy tale. At first, there was tension. The firebrand wanted to push harder, faster, louder. The perfectionist wanted restraint, nuance, balance. Their first takes were jagged, uneven, clashing like storm against stone. But then, the magic began. Bit by bit, they adjusted. They listened to each other. They challenged each other. Each mistake became a new possibility. Each clash of style forged a sharper edge. By the third take, the air had changed. By the fifth, the room was no longer just a studio. It was a battlefield, a cathedral, a forge. Two voices striking against each other, fusing into something neither had ever achieved alone. Engineers would later describe the sound as a collision of worlds. One voice carried raw power, the other sculpted grace. Together, they created a sound no one thought possible, but not everyone in that studio was swept up in the magic. In the shadows, silent observers watched with unease. Executives, insiders, individuals whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. Because to them, this wasn't just a song. It was a threat. A duet like this could destabilize the industry. It could blur lines that labels and managers had spent decades keeping separate. It could overshadow other projects, unsettle egos, and tip the balance of power. Still, the recording went on. Take after take until at last it was done. A final version that left everyone in the room breathless, trembling, almost disbelieving what they had just heard. The tape was boxed, labeled, stored carefully in the producer's hands. But that night, as dawn began to rise, something else stirred in the silence. Because while the artists left the studio with hope, the tape did not leave with them. And by the time the sun was fully up, the song had vanished. Cliffhanger, it had been recorded. It had existed. But within hours, it was gone. The morning after that legendary recording session, everything seemed poised for history. The two artists had created something beyond imagination, a song that could transcend charts, genres, even generations. Their teams spoke of awards, of a surprise release that would shake the industry to its core. There was a rare feeling in the air, anticipation, electricity, destiny, and then silence. When the producer arrived to begin mixing the track, the master tape, the heart of the entire project, was gone. Not misplaced. Not mislabeled. Gone. At first, panic took over. Assistants tore through drawers, checked every cabinet, even searched the trash. No trace, calls were made, messages sent. No one admitted to moving it, no one had seen anything unusual. Yet the only thing more deafening than the absence of that tape was the absence of answers. In the world of music, losing a master recording isn't just rare, it's unthinkable. Studios have layers of security, chains of custody, redundant backups. Yet this tape had been spirited away like it had never existed at all, and that's when the whispers began. Some claimed a label executive ordered it removed, that the duet was too risky, too unpredictable. Others believed it was taken by someone inside the artist's inner circles, fearing that such a collaboration might outshine their solo work. A few even speculated that one of the artists themselves had second thoughts and pulled the plug before the song could escape into the world. But the deeper the search went, the more questions surfaced. Security footage from that night mysteriously went missing. Studio logs were incomplete. Witnesses contradicted one another. And strangest of all, the backup files that should have existed didn't. The session had been wiped clean from every machine. It was as if the song had been erased from reality itself. For one of the artists, the one who had seen this project as a rebirth, a second chance, the disappearance was a personal devastation. That track wasn't just a collaboration. It was a statement, a turning point. Its release could have rewritten the narrative of their career. To have it stolen felt like more than sabotage. It felt like betrayal. For the other, the loss was equally unsettling. They had approached the duet with skepticism, but in the end, they had poured themselves into it. It was the kind of rare creative synergy artists chase their entire lives. And now, it was gone before the world even knew it existed. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. The record labels grew cagey, refusing to discuss the project publicly. Lawyers got involved. Confidentiality clauses tightened. What had once been whispered about as a career-defining track was suddenly a forbidden subject. Even close collaborators were told never to mention the session again, and so, slowly, the duet slipped into the shadows. Rumors began to replace facts. Myths formed where details used to be. Some insiders insisted the tape had been destroyed outright, burned to ash in a corporate vault. Others swore it still existed, tucked away in a private archive, passed between collectors like a priceless artifact. But one fact remained beyond doubt. The song that could have changed everything was gone, and the world, for now, would never hear it. Cliffhanger. But even though the tape had vanished, the story was far from over, and because whispers of the lost duet were already beginning to echo through the music world. You can't erase a legend before it's born, not completely, even though the duet had disappeared. Fragments of its existence began to leak through the cracks of the industry. A sound engineer let slip a detail about the session in a late-night interview. A producer spoke cryptically about the greatest track that never came out. A journalist swore they'd heard a 30-second snippet played behind closed doors at a private listening party. And slowly, the myth grew. At first, it was dismissed as just that, a myth. Fans speculated about who the mysterious partner might have been, what the song might have sounded like, what message it might have carried. But as more and more insiders confirmed the story, always vaguely, always carefully, the legend hardened into something undeniable. Something had been recorded that night. Something extraordinary. Record label boardrooms grew tense as questions from the press intensified. Executives refused to comment. Lawyers issued polite but firm denials. Yet the more they tried to bury the story, the louder it became. By now, music journalists were treating the lost duet like a holy grail. Every album release, every compilation, every leaked demo was scoured for hidden traces of it. Online forums lit up with speculation. Amateur sleuths cross-referenced lyric sheets and chord progressions from both artists' catalogs, searching for shared fingerprints. Even bootleggers claimed to have fragments, though most turned out to be fakes. Still, the myth refused to die, and in the silence left by the missing song, a strange transformation occurred. It stopped being just about the music. It became a symbol. For some fans, it was the symbol of corporate greed, the belief that the industry had silenced something beautiful to protect its own profits. For others, it was about fear, that the duet's message was too bold, too challenging, too dangerous to be released. And for many, it became a metaphor for collaboration itself, how something incredible can emerge from opposites, only to be crushed by forces that fear change. Inside the industry, the whispers grew darker. Some claimed the song contained lyrics that referenced real-life scandals, scandals the artists' teams would do anything to keep buried. Others hinted that the project had sparked tension between their labels, each wanting ownership of the final product. A few even suggested that government agencies, yes, government agencies, had taken an interest, suspicious of the duet's political undertones. No one knew the truth. But one thing was certain. Something powerful had been created, and someone, somewhere, didn't want the world to hear it. Then came the most tantalizing rumor of all. A former studio intern, long since removed from the business, came forward claiming they had heard the song in full before it vanished. According to them, it wasn't just a duet. It was a confession, a revelation hidden in plain sight. The lyrics, they said, spoke openly of betrayal, exploitation, and the corruption behind the glamorous facade of fame. It was more than a song. It was a direct challenge to the very machine that had made these artists superstars. If that was true, the motive for burying it suddenly became clear. The duet wasn't just a commercial risk. It was a threat. But like all good myths, every new detail raised more questions than it answered. Was the intern telling the truth? Were the snippets heard by insiders real or fabricated? And if the song truly was that dangerous, who had the most to lose if it was released? As the years passed, the whispers never faded. In fact, they grew louder, fueled by anniversary retrospectives, documentary interviews, and unauthorized biographies. The duet became the industry's great what if, the missing puzzle piece in two legendary careers. And while fans had no proof the song still existed, many believed, some even swore, that one day it would resurface. Cliffhanger. But as the world obsessed over rumors and legends behind closed doors, the story was taking a darker turn, and the betrayal that followed would tear everything apart. The longer the duet remained hidden, the more poisonous the silence became. What had begun as curiosity and speculation soon twisted into suspicion. Fans wondered, if the song truly was erased against the artist's wishes, why weren't they fighting for it? Why weren't they demanding its release? Why had both grown strangely quiet on the subject? The answer, as insiders would later reveal, was more devastating than anyone expected. Behind the closed doors of boardrooms and backstage corridors, the two artists, once united in the fire of creation, found themselves on opposite sides of a widening divide. One wanted to fight, to take legal risks, to defy the machine, to force the song into the world no matter the consequences. For them, the duet wasn't just music, it was salvation. The other? They hesitated. Contracts weighed heavy. Sponsors whispered threats. Managers warned of retaliation. And beneath it all lurked fear. Fear of losing everything they had built. Fear of being blacklisted. Fear of burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. So, when the pressure reached its breaking point, one of the legends made a choice. A deal was struck. A signature was scrawled across a confidential agreement. The duet would stay buried. The world would never hear it, and their collaborator would never forgive them. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't public. There were no screaming fights captured by paparazzi, no headlines exposing the fracture. Instead, it was quiet, icy. A silence between two voices that had once soared together, now strangled by mistrust. Friends noticed the distance immediately. Once inseparable in public appearances, the artists began avoiding each other. Their teams pretended nothing had changed, but those closest to them knew the truth. The duet hadn't just been silenced, it had destroyed a bond. For one of them, the wound cut deep. They felt abandoned, sold out, robbed of what could have been their defining moment. To them, it wasn't about money, contracts, or corporate power. It was about art, about truth, about leaving something timeless behind. And now, all of that had been traded away for safety. The other, weighed down by guilt, tried to justify their choice. They told themselves it was about survival, about keeping the spotlight alive, about protecting not just themselves, but everyone in their orbit. But in the quiet of the night, when no one else was watching, they couldn't escape the gnawing thought. Had they sacrificed greatness for fear? The fallout lingered for years. The duet became the unspoken wound between them. Interviews danced around it, fans speculated endlessly, and insiders whispered about the betrayal that had broken one of music's most unlikely partnerships. And yet, even betrayal could not erase the past completely. Because though the tape was gone from the studio, and though one artist had signed its burial warrant, a shadow of hope remained. Unbeknownst to both of them, someone else, someone with no intention of letting history die, had kept a copy. Cliffhanger. And years later, in the most unexpected of places, the forbidden tape would resurface. It began with a rumor, a whisper among collectors, a claim too wild to believe. Someone had the tape, not the erased master, not the ghost of a session that had vanished into corporate vaults. A real copy, fragile, magnetic, alive. At first, it sounded like every other false lead. Bootleggers had long claimed to possess fragments of the duet, only to reveal crude mashups or faked demos. But this time the whispers were different. This time the details lined up. According to the story, a recording engineer, one of the quiet, unseen hands behind the console, had made a duplicate before the session disappeared. Not out of malice, but out of reverence. They had felt, deep in their bones, that what they witnessed was too extraordinary to vanish forever. And so, in the secrecy of that night, they'd created a shadow copy. and for decades they had guarded it like treasure. The existence of this tape became a dangerous open secret, passed quietly from hand to hand, hidden in private vaults, occasionally played for select ears in hushed, candle-lit rooms. Each time those who heard it described the same thing: the song was real, the duet was alive, and it was everything the myths had promised. But possessing the tape came at a price. Lawyers lurked like hunters, tracking every hint of its existence. Threatening letters arrived. Cease and desist orders multiplied. Rumors spread of collectors pressured into silence, of tapes seized and destroyed, of lives quietly ruined for daring to hold on to a piece of forbidden art. The song had become contraband, a weapon, a thing too dangerous to own openly, yet too powerful to let go. For the artists themselves, the reappearance of the tape was both a blessing and a curse. For the one who had fought for its release, it was vindication, proof that their dream hadn't died, that the duet still existed in some form. For the one who had betrayed it, it was torment, a reminder of the choice they could never take back. Historians, critics, and fans all clamored for answers. Was this tape authentic? Who had it now? And most importantly, would it ever be heard publicly? The industry's response was swift and merciless. Every leak was stamped out, every rumor shut down. Every collector who whispered too loudly found themselves silenced in one way or another. The duet, it seemed, was destined to remain trapped in shadows, an eternal ghost, and yet despite the danger, the legend only grew. People spoke of late-night encounters where they swore they'd heard the tape played from behind locked doors. Writers claimed to have caught fragments in documentaries buried under other tracks. A few fans even insisted they'd heard the chorus broadcast accidentally on a pirate radio station, only to vanish seconds later. Whether true or not, these glimpses kept the fire alive. They proved one thing above all: the duet wasn't just a rumor. It was real, tangible, and out there somewhere. But if the tape truly survived, why hadn't it been released? The answer, as those who looked closer would discover, had nothing to do with contracts, nothing to do with money. The reason was far darker. Cliffhanger. Because the song's disappearance was never about business, it was about the truths hidden in its lyrics, truths that powerful people would do anything to silence. For years, the duet was spoken of in hushed tones, its existence debated, its meaning left to rumor. But eventually the veil began to lift, and what it revealed was far more dangerous than anyone had dared to imagine. It started with fragments, not of sound, but of paper. A lyric sheet, rescued from the bottom of an old file drawer, smudged and worn but unmistakably real. Handwriting from both artists scribbled side by side. The words were raw, confessional, and utterly fearless. They sang of exploitation, of contracts signed in desperation and enforced in silence. They sang of lives consumed by the very machine that had promised them freedom. They sang of betrayal, of being paraded on stage as icons while behind the scenes, their humanity was stripped away. The duet wasn't just a song. It was testimony, a declaration of war. For the first time, people began to understand why the track had vanished. It wasn't simply that the collaboration was too bold, too unpredictable. It was that the lyrics exposed truths that those in power could never allow into the open. Executives feared scandal. Sponsors feared backlash. Politicians feared the ripple effect of voices too powerful, too adored, daring to bite the very hand that fed them. And buried within those words was something even more shocking: veiled references to real events. Contracts broken, trust shattered, even private betrayals between the artists themselves. The song was not abstract poetry. It was lived experience, sung in unison by two icons who had felt the weight of fame's cage and decided, for one night at least, to speak without chains. The discovery of the lyric sheet ignited a new storm. Music historians declared it one of the boldest works never released. Fans demanded its unveiling. Journalists dug deeper, piecing together testimony from anyone who had ever set foot in that studio. And though the tape itself remained hidden, the truth of its contents had finally leaked out. But the revelations came at a cost. The artist who had once signed away the duet's fate found themselves dragged back into controversy. Critics accused them of cowardice. Fans accused them of betrayal. They were forced to relive the very nightmare they had tried so hard to bury. For the other artist, the unveiling was bittersweet. They felt vindicated at last, their belief in the song's importance proven true, but the joy was tempered by sorrow. Sorrow that the world had only fragments, when they could have had the full creation, and yet, even with scraps of lyrics and second-hand accounts, the song's power continued to grow. It became a ghostly anthem for truth, rebellion, and survival, a hymn the world could almost hear even in silence. But if the song had already revealed so much, what was left hidden? What deeper secret lay inside the recording itself, still locked away in shadows? The answer was closer than anyone realized. Cliffhanger. Because the final truth about the duet would not only reshape how we saw the artists, it would reshape how we saw their legacies. As the years passed, the duet transformed from rumor to legend, from legend to myth. It became the great what if of modern music, a song that could have redefined careers, rewritten history, and perhaps even changed the cultural landscape forever. But what it left behind were scars. For one artist, the absence of the duet became a shadow hanging over their entire career. Every album they released afterward, every performance they gave, was haunted by the ghost of what might have been. Critics compared their later work unfavorably to the brilliance they had glimpsed in that one forbidden night. Fans whispered that they had peaked not on record, but in a song they were never allowed to share. For the other, the weight of betrayal never fully lifted. Their career continued, polished and successful, but always tinged with unease. They smiled for cameras, accepted awards, filled arenas. Yet behind the glitter, there lingered a hollow silence, the knowledge that their greatest artistic risk, their most honest confession, had been smothered by their own hand. The duet became more than a missing track. It became a mirror, reflecting the cost of compromise, the brutality of an industry that feared truth more than failure, and the fragility of even the strongest bonds. And outside the walls of fame, among fans and historians, the obsession never faded. Articles dissected the missing song with forensic precision. Documentaries speculated endlessly, piecing together fragments of testimony. Collectors searched for the elusive tape, treating it like the holy grail of modern music. Over time, the duet's absence became as powerful as its presence might have been. Because in silence, imagination thrives. Fans filled the void with their own visions of what the track must have sounded like. Writers described it as a revolution lost, a fire extinguished, a prophecy silenced. And yet, there were always whispers. Whispers that the tape still lived, that it had survived executives, contracts, betrayals, that somewhere, in a vault, in a drawer, in the hands of someone who understood its worth, the duet waited. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for a world finally ready to hear it. But time is cruel. One of the artists passed, leaving behind a legacy forever marked by the absence of that song. Their fans mourned not just the loss of the person, but the loss of the chance that the duet might finally be revealed with their blessing. For the surviving artist, the weight grew heavier. They became the sole guardian of a secret too large to carry, yet too dangerous to release. And as the years rolled on, interviews circled the question again and again. Would the duet ever be heard? Would the world ever know? Each time the answer was silence. And so the duet slipped further into legend. Not forgotten, not erased, but suspended between memory and myth. A song that lived in fragments, in whispers, in the imaginations of millions. A song that proved something simple, something devastating. Sometimes, the greatest works of art are the ones the world is never meant to hear. But just when it seemed the story had reached its quiet, tragic end, a final revelation would change everything we thought we knew. Cliffhanger. Because the duet had not been destroyed. It had survived. And the shocking truth about where it lay hidden was about to emerge. For decades, the story of the duet seemed sealed in silence. A missing masterpiece. A lost confession. A song swallowed whole by fear, contracts, and compromise. But history has a strange way of loosening its grip on secrets, and when the revelation finally came, it was more explosive than anyone had imagined. It began quietly, with a researcher, a devoted fan turned music historian. Their obsession with the duet bordered on madness. They had combed through archives, interviewed engineers, traced the movements of executives who had long since left the industry. For years, their quest led only to dead ends. Until one evening, in the basement of a retired producer, they stumbled across something almost unbelievable, a locked box, dusty, unmarked, forgotten. Inside lay reels of tape, neatly labeled but largely unremarkable. Standard session work, false starts, alternate takes. But hidden in the stack was one reel that bore two names, written side by side, names that should never have been written together on a single recording. At first, the historian assumed it was a mistake. But when the tape was carefully threaded through an old machine and the first notes spilled into the room, their hands began to shake. The duet was real, entire, untouched. Two voices, blending like fire and smoke, laying bare their pain, their anger, their truth. The lyrics that had circulated in fragments now came alive in full, undeniable form. And the effect was overwhelming. It was not just a song. It was a confrontation, a raw, dangerous conversation between two giants of music, daring to expose the very machinery that had built them. The historian froze. They understood instantly why this song had been buried. Its honesty was lethal, its message incendiary. Released in its time, it could have torn the industry apart. But now, decades later, hearing it felt like touching a live wire. Word of the discovery spread in whispers at first. Archivists heard it, then a select few journalists. Each described the same thing, an unshakable, haunting masterpiece that refused to let go of the listener. Yet here lay the cruel twist. Legal chains still bound it. Even though the tape had survived, even though the voices of both artists still thundered across those reels, the same corporate machinery that silenced it once was poised to silence it again. But this time, something was different. The world had changed. The industry had shifted. Fans were louder, more connected, more relentless. The revelation of the duet's survival ignited a storm like none before. Hashtags trended. Campaigns erupted. Entire online movements rallied for its release. It was no longer just a song. It was a demand for truth, a symbol of liberation. And yet, amid the chaos, one chilling question lingered. If the duet had been hidden this long, what else had been buried? Cliffhanger. And the answer to that question would prove that the duet was not just a lost track, but part of a much darker secret. The survival of the duet should have been the triumphant ending to the story. A masterpiece rediscovered, a truth finally unveiled. But the truth has a way of digging deeper, clawing past what you thought you knew, because the duet wasn't hidden alone. When archivists combed through the rest of that forgotten box, they found more than stray reels. They uncovered contracts, brittle, yellowing documents that revealed the full scope of what had really happened. The duet was never meant to be buried for artistic reasons. It was buried as part of a calculated cover-up. The contracts told the story of an industry terrified of exposure. Clauses demanded silence. Non-disclosure agreements stretched across decades. Entire careers had been leveraged, manipulated, threatened into compliance. The duet, with its razor-sharp lyrics and dangerous honesty, was the one piece of evidence that could have torn open the facade. And so it was locked away, not because it was unfinished, not because it was unworthy, but because it was too true. But the documents revealed something more chilling still. The duet was not the only casualty. Other songs had been shelved. Other artists had been silenced. A pattern emerged. Voices that dared to speak too loudly, too honestly, too critically of the industry's machinery were erased, rewritten, or suppressed. The duet was simply the crown jewel of this cover-up, the most dangerous secret of them all. As the revelations spread, the narrative shifted. This was no longer just about two artists and a lost collaboration. It was about decades of silence, manipulation, and exploitation. It was about an industry that thrived not only on sound, but on suppression, And for the surviving artist, the darker secret was unbearable. To know that their most intimate creation had been weaponized, locked away to protect the very forces they had once trusted, it was a betrayal beyond words. They faced the press with trembling hands, their voice breaking as they admitted what had happened. For years, they had carried the weight of silence. Now, finally, they let the truth pour out. The world listened, some with shock, some with rage, some with tears. And as the surviving artist finished their confession, they whispered something that sent chills down every spine. The duet was meant to be heard. Not for me, not even for us, but for everyone who has ever been silenced. With those words, the pressure exploded. Fans demanded justice. Scholars demanded accountability. The duet was no longer a myth, no longer a rumor. It was a weapon of truth, and the world would not rest until it was finally set free. But just as the pressure reached its peak, another revelation loomed. One final twist, because hidden within the reels themselves, in a section no one had yet dared to play, lay something even more shocking. Cliffhanger. And when that final layer of the duet was revealed, it would rewrite not just music history, but the very legacies of the artists themselves. For all the revelations, for all the secrets exposed, there remained one final mystery, one reel no one had dared to play through completely. Because tucked at the very end of the duet was something no one had expected, a hidden verse. When the tape finally spun to its conclusion, after the final chorus faded and the last harmony dissolved, silence lingered. Before a voice spoke, not sung but spoken, it was raw, it was unpolished, it was confessional. The voice belonged to one of the artists, the one who had believed most fiercely in the song's message. And in those unguarded words, recorded almost like a diary entry left on tape, they revealed a truth so devastating it reframed everything. They named names. They described the system with clarity sharper than any lyric. They spoke of executives who had manipulated them, of contracts designed to enslave rather than liberate, of betrayal at the highest levels. They confessed their doubts about fame, their exhaustion, their loneliness. And then, in a moment that struck like lightning, they turned not to the industry, but to their collaborator. With trembling honesty, they admitted their disappointment, their heartbreak, their sense of being abandoned in the fight. It was not just a verse. It was a wound recorded for eternity. Hearing it was like opening a sealed letter never meant for public eyes. It revealed the true cost of the duet's disappearance. Not only had the industry buried a song, it had buried a friendship, a bond that might have withstood everything if only the truth had been allowed to live. The hidden verse spread in hushed tones among those who heard it. It was too raw, too personal, too volatile to release without consent. And yet its very existence reframed the story. The duet was not only an act of rebellion, it was a cry for connection. The surviving artist, when told of the hidden verse, wept openly. For years, they had believed the silence was simply a compromise, a necessary evil to preserve careers. But now they knew. The silence had been personal. The silence had been felt as betrayal. And suddenly, the story of the duet was no longer just about music, industry, or legacy. It was about two human beings bound together in art, torn apart by forces greater than themselves. The hidden verse transformed the legend into tragedy. A masterpiece that might have saved not just an industry, but a friendship, had instead become the instrument of their separation. And yet, even in tragedy, there was beauty. For the hidden verse was not only pain. In its final lines, the artist's voice softened. They spoke of hope, of believing that one day, someone would hear their words and understand. One day, the truth would be free. And now, at last, that day had come. Cliffhanger. But what would the world do with the truth once it was finally placed in their hands? The story of the Unreleased Duet is not just the story of a song. It is the story of courage silenced, truth buried, and friendship tested by forces too large to fight. It is the story of how art, no matter how deeply hidden, finds its way back to light. The duet remains, even now, locked in legal battles, suspended between release and silence. And yet, in a strange way, it has already fulfilled its purpose, because without ever being released, it has been heard, not in full, not by millions, but in fragments, whispers, retellings. It has shaped the way we think of the artists, reshaped how we understand the industry, and forced us to reckon with what happens when truth collides with power. And perhaps that is the most haunting part. The duet was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be human. Two voices, fragile and fierce, daring to tell the world what it did not want to hear. Its legacy lives in the questions it forces us to ask. How many other songs were silenced? How many other truths buried? How many voices traded away their honesty for survival? The Unreleased Duet is not just a missing track. It is a mirror held up to all of us, a reminder that art is fragile, that honesty is dangerous, and that silence, no matter how carefully constructed, never lasts forever. For fans, it remains a torch, a symbol of what could have been, a reminder to demand more, to listen deeper, to never stop asking for the truth. For historians, it is a treasure, a riddle, a haunting case study in the cost of compromise. And for the surviving artist, it is both a wound and a gift. A wound that will never fully heal, but also a gift. Proof that their collaboration was not forgotten. Proof that their voices, united for one night, would echo across generations. The duet that could have changed music forever may never play on radio waves. It may never stream on digital platforms, but in silence, it has already changed music. Changed how we see it, how we understand it, how we value truth within it. And so the final note is not one of loss, but of legacy. The duet may remain unreleased, but it is unforgettable. It is proof that art, no matter how deeply buried, cannot be destroyed, because in the end, the world does not forget. It waits, it whispers, it remembers, and one day, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps years from now, when the reel finally spins and the voices are heard in full, the world will not just listen, it will finally understand. Final payoff. The duet that could have changed music forever may still be unheard, but it will never be unsung.